For 12 years, the Soviet Union won every single round of the space race. First satellite, first animal in orbit, first man in space, first woman in space, first spacewalk. Every milestone, every headline, every humiliation. The Americans were always second. And behind every Soviet victory was a rocket, a different rocket, each one built faster, cheaper, and with less margin for error than anything the West was producing. This is the story of those rockets, where they came from, what they were built to do, and why, at the moment it mattered most, one of them destroyed everything. V-2, 1944. The Soviet space program didn't start in Moscow. It started in a forest in northern Germany. In 1945, as the war collapsed around them, two superpowers raced toward the same town, Peenemünde, where a German engineer named Wernher von Braun had built something that had never existed before: a ballistic missile. The V-2 stood 46 feet tall. It burned alcohol and liquid oxygen. It hit speeds of 3,500 miles per hour. It could carry a 2,200-pound warhead 200 miles, and there was no defense against it. None. You heard it after it landed, if you survived. The Americans got von Braun. They smuggled him and 100 of his engineers into the United States under Operation Paperclip. The Soviets got the factory. They stripped it, every blueprint, every jig, every piece of remaining hardware. They shipped it east, and they put a man named Sergei Korolev in charge of figuring out what to do with it. Korolev had spent 6 years in a Siberian labor camp. He had frostbite damage that never fully healed. He had been beaten during interrogation and lost most of his teeth. He would become the most important rocket engineer of the 20th century. The Americans didn't know his name until he was dead. The V-2 was not a space rocket, it was a weapon. But it was the proof of concept that made everything else possible. Every Soviet rocket that followed, every one, traces its lineage directly to this design. R-7 Semyorka, 1957. Korolev didn't copy the V-2. He understood it. Then he built something it could never be. The R-7 Semyorka, Little 7, was designed as an intercontinental ballistic missile. Its target was the United States. Its payload was a thermonuclear warhead. Its range was over 5,000 miles. To get there, Korolev needed a new approach. One central core engine, 4 strap-on boosters igniting simultaneously at liftoff, all 5 stages burning together before the boosters separate and fall away. The result produced 880,000 pounds of thrust at liftoff. It stood 112 feet tall. It weighed 280,000 pounds fully fueled. On October 4, 1957, Korolev's team removed the warhead. They replaced it with a polished aluminum sphere 23 inches across, carrying a radio transmitter. Sputnik weighed 184 pounds. It took 98 minutes to orbit the Earth. The Americans had nothing. They had a program called Vanguard that had been delayed, defunded, and redesigned 3 times. When they finally attempted a launch in December 1957, it rose 4 feet off the pad and exploded. The Soviets called it Kaputnik. The R-7 wasn't just a rocket, it was a message, and the message was received. R-3, Soyuz, 1966. The R-7 evolved. Over the next decade, Korolev's team refined, stretched, and upgraded the basic architecture until it became something new, something that would outlast the Soviet Union itself: the Soyuz rocket. The configuration was the same: central core, 4 strap-on boosters, sequential stage separation, but everything else improved. More powerful engines, refined fuel systems, a third upper stage added for orbital precision. At liftoff, 920,000 pounds of thrust, height 162 feet, liftoff weight 308,000 pounds. The Soyuz was built to carry people. The Soyuz spacecraft, perched at the top behind a launch escape tower, carried a crew of 3. The escape system could pull the capsule away from an exploding rocket in under 2 seconds. It has been used. The Soyuz rocket has launched more than 1,900 times. It carried cosmonauts to Mir. It carried astronauts to the International Space Station. After the Space Shuttle retired in 2011, it was the only way humans reached orbit for 9 years. No rocket in history has launched more people into space. Korolev did not live to see most of this. He died on the operating table in January 1966, a routine procedure complicated by the damage done to his jaw in the labor camp. He was 59. The rocket he designed is still flying. 4. Proton, 1965. While Korolev refined the Soyuz, a rival program was taking shape across town. Vladimir Chelomey was a different kind of engineer, connected, political. He had the ear of Khrushchev in ways Korolev never did, and he was building a rocket the Soviet military actually wanted, the Proton. Where the Soyuz was elegant, a direct lineage from a single original concept, the Proton was blunt, industrial, built for payload, not beauty. The first stage was unlike anything else flying. 6 external propellant tanks mounted around a central core, angled outward like the legs of an insect. Not because it was the optimal design, because the tanks were too wide to fit inside Soviet rail tunnels any other way. At liftoff, 2 million pounds of thrust, height 190 feet, liftoff weight 1,500,000 pounds, payload to orbit 47,000 pounds, nearly double what the Soyuz could manage. The Proton launched Soviet space stations, it launched interplanetary probes, it launched communications satellites for half the world's governments. Its failure rate was higher than it should have been. The propellant it burned was hypergolic, meaning the fuel and oxidizer ignited on contact, toxic, corrosive, dangerous to handle. Several Proton failures have contaminated large areas of Kazakhstan with nitrogen tetroxide spills that turned the soil orange. The rocket flew anyway, because it worked often enough, and because there was nothing else that could carry what it carried. 1969. This is where the story changes. By 1964, the Soviet Union had decided to beat the Americans to the moon. Korolev was given the assignment. The rocket he designed was called the N-1. It was 344 feet tall. It weighed 6 million pounds fully fueled. At liftoff, it would generate 10,200,000 pounds of thrust, more than the Saturn V, more than any rocket ever built. To produce that thrust, Korolev needed engines, powerful ones. His preferred engine designer refused the contract, so Korolev turned to an aircraft engine bureau, engineers who had never built a rocket engine at scale. The result was the NK-15, a brilliant engine by any individual measure. The problem was how many were required. 30. 30 engines packed into the base of the first stage in 3 concentric rings. 30 engines that all had to ignite simultaneously. 30 engines whose plumbing was so complex that a single loose bolt, a single contaminated fuel line, could cascade into a catastrophic failure. The Americans had a computer monitor their Saturn V engines and shut down any that showed anomalies before they caused a chain reaction. The Soviets didn't have that computer. The N-1 launched 4 times. It exploded 4 times. The second launch, July 3, 1969, 2 weeks before Apollo 11, produced the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history. The rocket fell back onto the launch pad and destroyed it completely. It took 18 months to rebuild. The program was canceled in 1976, secretly. The hardware was destroyed. The blueprints were classified. 20 years the West didn't know the N-1 had ever existed. The Soviets never reached the moon. Energia, 1987. The N-1 failure left a hole in Soviet ambitions that took a decade to fill. What emerged was Energia, a different philosophy, a modular heavy-lift rocket built around a core hydrogen stage, the first Soviet rocket to use liquid hydrogen as fuel, with 4 kerosene-burning RD-170 strap-on boosters. The RD-170 was and remains the most powerful liquid fuel rocket engine ever built. Each one produced 1,600,000 pounds of thrust, 4 of them together 6.4 million pounds at liftoff. Total system thrust, 7.8 million pounds. Height, 192 feet. Liftoff weight, 4,400,000 pounds. Payload to orbit, 220,000 pounds. Energia launched twice. The first time carried a prototype weapons platform that failed to reach orbit. The second time carried Buran, the Soviet space shuttle, on its only flight. Buran flew unmanned, completed 2 orbits, and landed autonomously with a crosswind correction that its American counterpart could never have managed on autopilot. It was an extraordinary technical achievement. 3 months later, the Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union dissolved 4 years after that. Energia was canceled. Buran was placed in a hangar in Baikonur. In 2002, the hangar roof collapsed under the weight of snow. Buran was destroyed. 8 workers were killed. The most capable rocket the Soviets ever built flew twice. Then the country that built it ceased to exist.